Let's stick with this about the arguments they're making to the country and dig into the evolving strategies from Democrats and Republicans. Here's Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan.
Four facts will never change. The transcript speaks for itself. There was no conditionality, no quid pro quo in the transcript, no pressure, no pushing, no linkage to investigations. And of course, President Zelensky didn't pledge to do any investigations prior to the aid being released. And the Ukrainians didn't know that the aid was even on hold at the time of the call.
Speaker Pelosi on Thursday discussed possible bribery charges.
Quid pro quo, bribery, and that is in the Constitution attached to the impeachment proceedings.
So what was the bribe here?
The bribe is to grant or withhold military assistance in return for a public statement of a fake investigation into the elections. So that's bribery. Yes.
As Heather wrote for Politico, quote, the speaker's remark is one of her strongest statements yet. Yamiche, Heather also brought up how the Democrats are moving away from quid pro quo. What is the White House moving toward? Is it an argument about, quote, secondhand information? What's the counter argument over at the West Wing?
There are, by my count, at least 15 different responses by the White House. There's everything from this is all hearsay to this is an unfair process to these Democrats just are mad about the 2016 election and they just want to basically undo it and are trying to find any sort of way to get President Trump out of office. We don't see, I think, a central message from the White House. And what we saw today was the president, he's met with at least 120 House Democrats, 120 House Republicans. He's also met with 42 Republican senators. But after all those meetings, he then started tweeting about Ambassador Yovanovitch and upended all of the Republican messaging. So there is, I don't see a central messaging strategy from the White House as it goes forward.
Dan, where is the country on this? You've studied polling.
When the Ukraine story first broke, we saw a spike in support for impeach and remove from office. In some ways a rather surprising one given where public opinion had been through the Mueller report. I think what we've seen since then is a hardening of the lines. The support for impeachment in a number of the recent polls has not gone up much, if at all, from where it was in the early stage of the Ukraine story, whereas the opposition has ticked up a little bit. And I think that we've seen that certainly in the way the Republicans have approached this, in the degree to which there are no real cracks publicly yet in most of the Republican conference in either the House or the Senate. There are a few people, but for the most part, everybody's standing firm. So I think it is a challenge for the Democrats. The politics of this are obviously fraught. It seemed as though the Speaker was drawn into moving in this direction as opposed to wanting to do so, that she felt a constitutional obligation given what we have learned over the last month or plus. But the politics of it are difficult, and I think that's what the Democrats are going to be wrestling with as they push forward.
And there could be a curveball, Michael. We have an IG report possibly coming out in the next couple of weeks from the Department of Justice looking at the Russia probe into President Trump's campaign. Attorney General Bill Barr was at the White House this week. We're not entirely sure about the subject of that meeting, but that IG report looms on the horizon. We began tonight talking about clashing of institutions. What could that IG report mean to this impeachment inquiry?
Well, I think it does circle back to what you said at the top. And one of the arguments that we are hearing from the president and his defenders is, in effect, this is the deep state. They've been trying to stage a coup against him since the day he was inaugurated, and the bureaucracy is fundamentally Democratic. These people wanted Hillary Clinton to win, and they'll do anything that they have to get President Trump out of office. And that was essentially the argument in the Russia investigation coming from the president and his allies. It's a deep state coup, and you are seeing echoes of that today. And in fact, you know, we're hearing the same words verbatim in some cases. And so that IG report could make the case that the Russia investigation itself was somehow fundamentally unfair, extra-legal, and politically motivated. And the president, I'm sure, will say, you see, this is just happening to me left and right. That's all they want to do. And I think a lot of his supporters will accept that argument and tune it out and say it's the swamp and they're out to get him.
And this idea of a deep state, you see this in the Republican argument about the whistleblower. They keep saying the Democrats must call forward the whistleblower. How is that factor and that dynamic playing into the proceedings on Capitol Hill?
Well, they brought the whistleblower up again today, Republicans did, and Democrats have a fairly coherent argument against it, which is Republicans keep saying that all the witnesses they've called so far have not heard anything firsthand. This is all hearsay. Well, the whistleblower account, by their definition, would be hearsay because he was compiling reports that he had heard from White House officials who were on the call with the president and the Ukrainian president. So Democrats look back at the Republicans and they say, why should we call him or her if this is just hearsay and you guys are going to dismiss it anyway? And so I think, that's a back and forth, but this just shows how Republicans' defense and strategy is kind of all over the map, and they haven't been able to find anything that sticks. They said privately today there was a break in between the hearing after the tweet and the rest of the hearing, their break for votes. And they said that, they were very dumbfounded by Trump's tweet because they had spent many hours this week having mock hearings, and senior Republican leaders had cautioned their lawmakers, do not attack Yovanovitch, do not attack Yovanovitch. And then President Trump did that, and they had to, defend it or dismiss it in a way.
Nimish, you brought up how the president's been meeting with all these Republican senators. There's a trial in the Senate on the horizon. I was at the Senate this week talking to different Republicans. There's a divide over whether the trial should be 5 weeks like it was for President Clinton in '99, or whether it should be 6 to 8 weeks. Senator Burr was talking about that, or whether it should be very short, a week long. Senator Paul, Trump ally, is talking about something like that, a very short trial. What does the White House want?
I think the White House, in some ways, wants whatever ends in President Trump being acquitted. I think that that's the most important thing to them. I think that there is some thought that if you drag it out and it starts going into the Democratic primaries and people are voting in Iowa while this trial is still going on, that could be in some ways distracting because you have several senators running for office, running for the Democratic nomination that would have to be sitting for this trial. So that would be Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, others. But I think there's also this idea that President Trump wants this to be over. He is really, these tweets today and all sorts of kind of comments that he's making, this is not the president that we've seen deal with other public hearings. So I think that the president is, even as he says that he kind of welcomed the impeachment inquiry and wanted to make his case to the American public, I think we can see a president that's very agitated by all this.
But some of these senators, the Republicans, are pretty quiet. They keep saying they're jurors, they don't want to comment. What's your read?
My read is that I don't see a fissure. I think of it like, will these hearings have a stick of dynamite that will sort of blast it open? Will there be some witness in some moment that really changes the dynamic? I think you need a big blast to do it. That what we've seen so far has been kind of chipping away bit by bit, but I don't think it's going to be enough. We'll see what happens, but the Republican senators have hung pretty tight. There were some pretty dark days during the Mueller investigation. Sure was a lot of reason to think the president might have been obstructing justice. That didn't do it for them. So I think people who are counting on that are going to be holding their breath for a long time.
What explains that, Dan? The Republican Party, despite not loving President Trump privately, sometimes publicly, sticking with him at this time of crisis?
I think it's the division in the country and the degree to which those lines, as I said earlier, have been and continue to be very, very hardened. I would think that the one thing that would affect Republican senators is if there were a significant move in public opinion away from the president. His approval rating, as we've known for 3 years, has basically traveled in a very narrow range. It doesn't go very high or very low from where it started out. That, I think, is why we see what we see in terms of impeachment. The impeachment public opinion today is similar to his approval rating. That doesn't move much.